Hi everybody, this is Mr. Farmer, and today we're talking about supply and demand. Here we go. So the topics are, first off, what are markets? We're going to talk about the law of demand and law of supply, and then we're going to very quickly talk about some graphing, just kind of what it looks like in general. So first off, markets are any time a producer, who's one that makes the good, and a buyer, the one who's wanting the good, come together and they're acting in a market. You buy clothes at a store, that's a market. You rent an apartment, that's a market. You get paid for a job, that's a market called the labor market or the factor market. You purchase something in the stock market. The stock market is still a market, even in its title. So the point of this is everything is all about supply and demand, which is why it's the cornerstone of all of economics. So graphically, this is what the basic supply and demand curve looks like. You can see on the y-axis, it is the price that the market will be selling the good at. On the x-axis, the horizontal, we have quantity, and that's going to be the quantity of the market. You can see we have an upward sloping supply curve, just usually labeled S for supply, and a downward sloping demand curve, D for demand. Now, as we keep going throughout the course, we are going to be talking about, does the shape of these curves actually look like this? They can shift. You'll actually be reading more about that, and kind of overall what it looks like. Now, in the very middle, you see we have some little dotted lines. They just identify where the X kind of marks the spot, and that's going to be called the equilibrium. That's where the market wants to be at. And that's going to be a very important topic because markets want to get there, but sometimes they can't get there. We do also label the market price and quantities, which is the P and the Q kind of in the middle of those. That's just to let us know where it is. Now that is something you really have to do. This is the most basic graph we have. Just two curves. They definitely add up with as much of about 6 or 7 curves. All the curves can shift. And so knowing which price and what quantity with all those curves on there is going to be really, really important to do. So just develop that habit now. So demand. The demand for good is based off of the willingness and the ability for a buyer to buy the good or the service. So on the left, I have a car, and I might be able to afford that car. I don't want to buy that car, so I don't demand it. On the other side, I have the most expensive cars according to Motor1.com. Okay, that looks like a cool car, but I don't exactly want to spend the money to buy that car. So I, in fact, don't demand either one of these. I'm not willing to buy the left one, and I'm not able or want to buy the one on the right. So I don't demand either one of these. For a consumer to demand something, they both have to want to buy it and be able to buy the good. And to help us with that, we have a demand curve or demand schedule. The demand curve is on the left. It's just a graphical expression of the demand. And you notice it's downward sloping. We're going to talk about that. That identifies the law of demand. On the right, we have a demand schedule, which is just a data table with gives the numbers, price. And at that price, for instance, at $15, this consumer market will buy 4 of whatever this good is. At a price of 10, they buy 6, and so on and so on. You can see the numbers are the exact same. They both show the same things. The demand curve does show more data points, so usually we do use the curves and the graphs. So what you notice is that as the price decreased, the quantity that would be purchased increases. This is known as the law of demand. So the price and quantity for demand have a negative correlation. They go in alternative directions, which is why it's downward sloping. Question. You go to the store. You're going to buy a bottle of water. They're identical price or identical goods, but the one on the left is worth $1. The one on the right, you'd have to pay $5. Which would you rather buy? The one on the left, it's $1. Why? It's a lower price. You're more willing to spend that money. You're more willing to depart with that $1 bill to buy that same good. It's the law of demand. Nothing unique. You're all consumers, and we're just identifying it. Yeah, this is a thing. Now, economically, we need to kind of discuss why that is. We need to sound fancy. So we have a couple of different things. The first one, diminishing marginal utility, is kind of an overall thing, and that concept is going to play a huge role throughout this entire course, even second semester in AP Macroeconomics. The other two are more definition, income effect and substitution effect. Not as big of a concept, although we do come back and kind of prove this again later mathematically. So let's start with this first one, which is kind of actually the main one, even though it's usually not listed in this. So diminishing marginal utility. So whenever we talk about demand or supply, you always need to talk about it in a specific time period. Is it a day, a week, a month, a year, whatever it might be? So let's say throughout a day. Within a day, that would be the specific time period, each buyer will receive less satisfaction from each unit consumed. What does that mean? Well, think of a buffet. At some point, you probably went to a buffet. You paid your price, the flat fee, whatever that was. You ate food, hope it was great, and then you left. Why? Well, they kicked me out. We closed down the buffet. Good job. Good on you. Most likely, though, is that you got full. You were done with the food. So what'd you do? You left. Why? Because that next plate of food didn't sound good. The marginal, which in economics is the next, utility, the usefulness, diminishes, decreases. So over a period of time, the same good or service diminishes the usefulness as you continue to consume one more good. And so to shorten all of that long-winded statement, we call it diminishing marginal utility. So the other one is the income effect. We can kind of look at diminished marginal utility. Why is it that you'd buy more goods at the lower price? Well, because you didn't have to overcome the diminished marginal utility of that price. At $15, that only works for the first 4 units. After that, the 5th unit, it's not worth $15 for you. Why? You're full. You've already had 4 plates from the buffet. Well, what if each plate is only $6? Okay, I can find some room in my stomach to eat some more. With that said, the second one is the income effect. Here's how it goes. Your income is fixed. That's the idea. So if your income is fixed at, let's say, $60, well, if the price is $15, then you can mathematically buy 4 units. If the price decreases down to 10, and assuming all money goes towards whatever this good is, mathematically you can buy 6 units, and so forth, and so forth. So even though your income doesn't change, in respect to the price of the good, your income increases as the price of the good decreases. So, as the price decreases, you're more willing to buy more of that good, and vice versa. The second one is the substitution effect, and it's pretty much identical to the income effect, except for one little detail. There's another good available. So, I do Pepsi and Coca-Cola because, hey, they're great examples of substitute goods. So we have the 2 goods, Coke and Pepsi, and at first the price is $1 and $1. And so for each one, the numbers in the red are going to be the quantities. Each customer will buy 50 Pepsis and 50 Cokes. Great. When the price changes to $1 for Coke and 50 cents for Pepsi, well, now, relative to Coke, the price of Pepsi is a lot cheaper. So I'm more willing to buy the Pepsi. Now, some people still like Coca-Cola. Great. Then you're still going to hold on even though it is relatively more expensive. So for the substitution effect, we're looking at the Pepsi. Whenever you hear effect, it's the good that is changing its price. We will talk about why Coke changes. We talk about the determinants of demand. You're going to be reading about that. And last, when the price increases for Pepsi, well, now it's relatively more expensive compared to Coke. And these 2 goods are substitutable for each other. They fulfill the same needs and utility. That's the substitution effect. So again, as the price increases for Pepsi, you don't want to buy as much. You'll go to alternatives. And vice versa. So you have the diminishing marginal utility, and that's kind of the main reason. But the income effect and substitution effect both illustrate why the demand curve is downward sloping, why the law of demand holds true. So graphically, we're looking at the right-hand side, the change in quantity demanded. That would be the Pepsi change in the price. That's the idea for it. Now, after this chapter, we really don't talk too much about the change in quantity demanded because we look at the supply and demand graph. What we do look at is more of the change in demand, which is going to be the determinants of demand. Again, you'll be reading about those. One thing to note, a change in demand will cause a change in quantity supplied. You'll move along that curve. Likewise, a change in supply, that would be the determinants get changed. A change in supply would change the quantity demanded because you've shifted the supply curve, so you move along the demand curve. So we still want to know those definitions, even though we don't use them a whole bunch. Speaking of supply, let's talk about it. So supply for goods is based on the willingness and ability for sellers to produce the goods and the services. So whenever you produce a good, there's inherent costs and opportunity costs. It costs this much just to get the materials for the labor, etc., etc., etc. There's also an opportunity cost. You can see here, you can do 1 hour studying, or you can watch 2 TV episodes. So if you do that 1 hour studying, you're giving up with that same time the 2 TV episodes. So what's to have to do with supply? For somebody to be willing to supply the good to you, you need to pay them enough to overcome that opportunity cost. Well, I could have run my business and sold this good to you, or I could have done something else. What price is going to make me want to work and sell this good for you? That's the price. And so with that, we come up with the supply curve and the supply schedule. Same thing, supply curve is the graph, supply schedule is just the graphical or the data table expression. And so here we can see a similar idea that, they both show the same things, but now at the price of $6, the producer is willing to supply 4 units. That's opposite what it was for the demand. But at the high price at $15, well, then they're willing to supply 10. Why? Opportunity cost. If you want to incentivize me to produce 10 units, you need to overcome my opportunity cost. I had to give up a lot more time, I had to put a lot more energy into producing this good, so what's going to make it worth my while? I'm going to increase the price. It's going to be more expensive, typically speaking, to produce more goods. Talk a lot more about that statement later, so don't argue with me right now. Okay, we're going to talk about this. But the law of supply, says law of demand on there, law of supply is as the price increases, the quantity supply increases. As the price decreases, the quantity supply decreases. So it's a positive or direct correlation between price and quantity. So for instance, now you're the seller of the water. Would you rather sell it at $1 or at $5? Well, if you've been to a sporting event or if you've been to the movie theater, you know they want to sell it at the $5 price. Why? It's more worth their while. They overcome more opportunity costs. They make more money. That's it. So again, it's upper slipping because of opportunity cost. Did you overcome the cost to produce the goods, plus all the opportunity costs, all the stuff that got given up in order to make me want to produce it? So if you want me to produce more, you have to overcome more of these costs. Tonight you'll be reading about the determinants of supply and demand, the rationing function of prices, and productive allocative efficiency. So that's 47 to 55. And before we leave, here is the supply curve. So a change in supply is the determinant, which we'll be reading about. That's going to shift the curve to the right and the left. A change in quantity supplied is going to move along the curve. That's going to be the change in quantity demanded, change in quantity supplied. Until next time.